Hi, my name is Persephone Abbott, and I am the daughter of Keith Kumison Abbott, the writer, poet, and artist. And I'm going to talk about something that I've never publicly talked about. And I'm partially doing this because of my father's missing archival materials. I'm here in Tacoma, Washington. And when I was a child, I used to come up from California to Washington, to Tacoma, and spend my summers here with my grandparents. My grandmother Abbott on my father's side, obviously, and my maternal grandparents, Hannah and Lloyd. I was dropped off during these periods and on my own with my relatives. My father would usually go someplace else, spend time with his own friends, and my mother did not come up to visit her relatives or stay with her relatives with me. When I came to Tacoma in 2021, I rented an Airbnb near Commencement Bay, and mainly because I was really curious about what it would be like to be in that area of Tacoma. If I look at the Historical Museum's collection online and their offerings and so what, I can see that the focus of the museum's collection is on the movers and the shakers of that area of town near Commencement Bay. However, my family on both sides here in Tacoma had nothing to do with that aspect of downtown Tacoma, and they didn't have any impact in that really, either socially or economically. My families, my father and my mother's families, both lived in areas back from Commencement Bay, so further back into the more wooded areas. So this time around in Tacoma, I rented an Airbnb in a location near Hannah and Lloyd's old house. And I was wondering what it would feel like to wake up to that kind of smell and the sounds of this particular area. And the last time that I stayed at my grandmother Hannah's house was in 1980, so it's been a while. 1980 was the year of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and that year my grandmother organized a family reunion at her home, and she had just put in a deck. And she was, by this time in 1980, a widow, and she was in charge of the house and property. It's quite an extensive property, actually. The house is definitely too large for one person. And so she eventually moved on from the house. But I have her letters to me at home in Amsterdam. And the last time she wrote me was in 1982, when she was putting in some new linoleum in the kitchen. And she also talked about who she was dating. She was very excited about that. My grandmother Hannah was a very social person. She liked people around her. She enjoyed entertaining people, and she enjoyed being in company. So I reconnected with Hannah in 1997. So between the years 1980 and 1997, I did not have contact with my grandmother. In 1997, when I recontacted her and reconnected in some ways with her, she had remarried and sold the house. That old house is a house I never said goodbye to, a house that I actually spent many contented hours in. So what happened? Well, my mother cut contact with Hannah, or actually what she did was she cut my contact with Hannah. It's complicated what happened, and the result of the cutting of contact not only broke my contact with my maternal family members, but it also damaged my contact with my paternal family members. This break also caused, in part, and impacted my father's own relationship with his family members. Family members on both sides of my family have skirted this issue over the years of the severing of my connections to Tacoma and family members. I don't really believe that anyone had a clue of how to handle the situation or solve the situation. It was actually unsolvable. And people had their own lives to get on with. They didn't have time to sort out this kind of mess that was going on. And there are many people involved actually in this story in ways. And I think it's safe to say whatever the situation was at hand, people have different takes on it and we're told different things. There are two things for me which stick out from this cutting of contact, this period, this episode, that went on obviously for quite some time. And that is that I, at the time, was 13, 14, 15 years old in those ages, and I was not told the truth. And actually, I don't know who was told the truth. My mother was a pathological liar. She was a person who took advantage of situations to hurt people, and this was her pattern throughout her entire life. This act of severance caused enormous unhappiness and distress, and doubtless affected my grandmother Hannah's mental and physical health. It also caused much distress to my grandmother Abbott. My grandmother Hannah's second husband, Art, was a kind man, and he understood, and he wasn't an educated man, but he had an instinct about this, and he understood what had happened to me better than myself. And he understood more the complexity of the trauma that I had experienced. Because when contact was not permitted anymore, and I was not allowed to talk about this severance from my grandmother to anyone. I was not allowed to talk about it. I was not allowed to talk about it to my parents, or with anyone outside my home, or with family members, if I had any contact with them. So what happened to me as a young teenager was that I started forgetting. I started erasing memories out of the pain. Unfortunately, I was never really able to completely reconnect with Hannah, although I recontacted her and started to work on a relationship with her in 1997. She, by the end of, let's say, 1999, had some health issues and started a downward slope into dementia. And everyone was walking on eggshells when it came to the topic of my mother, because people tried to keep that door open for my mother. They thought, well, maybe she'll come back and renew contact and make everything good, and that was the expectation. Of course, that never happened, and my mother never had any remorse about the situation. But back to my step-grandfather, Art. He bought a large black van with enough room in the back to put my grandmother's wheelchair in so he could pick her up from the nursing home that she was in and take her out for ice cream and so forth. And when I was visiting Art, I stayed with Art, and we visited my grandmother in the nursing home. But he really didn't want to drive anymore, and so he handed me the keys to this very large black van and said, well, you drive around. And he directed me around places, and he showed me Tacoma. And one day he directed me down a street, and I think he was watching me very carefully because we were in an area where I was having some flashbacks about the area, because in the old days, now it's changed. The old days, they used to have the street signs hanging above the streets instead of a cross on wires and crossway, and now they have the signs stuck to a pole, and so they're fixed alongside the street. But I remember being in my grandmother's car when she was driving around the area, and I remember reading those street signs. So I was driving this large black van, and I was having a bit of, oh my gosh, like I think I'm someplace I might remember. And we drove right past the house. And Art said, no, that, we have to turn around. Your grandmother's house is over there. And we pulled into the driveway, and there was no one home. And I just remember sitting frozen behind the steering wheel because I couldn't deal with the guilt and the shame. And that house I could not remember. And Art said, well, we should go inside. It's a pity we can't. And I just thought, no, I can't do it. I can't go there. After my grandmother died, all the memories came back. It just came flooding back. And I believe the trauma of forgetting was not just the trauma of separation, but also what I later learned in life, and that is that I have issues recalling faces because I have autism. I had a late diagnosis for autism. So what happens is I recognize people usually, but let's say I meet with somebody on a Tuesday, and then by the end of the week or the next week, I can't remember what they looked like. And what I will do is I will recall a photo of the person. And the photo could be taken 10 years previously, but in my mind, I think, oh, I met so-and-so, and they looked like that photo. And so this probably also assisted my erasing of memories. But what I do most of the time is I latch onto buildings and spaces. So this time in Tacoma, I'm staying near this old house of my grandmother's. And I drive by and I see that the house is for sale. So I arranged to go visit it, and it happened. They said, okay, yeah, come on in. You can see this house. So yesterday I went to view the house, which was actually empty at the moment. And I told myself in advance, like, this is my goodbye to that house. But what actually happened was that I came away feeling reestablished as the granddaughter of the person that owned that house. It was a pleasure to be there. It was a pleasure to walk through it again. And the person who took me was very kind. And I feel a little guilty because, of course, I said that I was looking to buy a house. Of course, I'm not going to buy a house here. But yeah, she's provided me, I think, a great therapy session for free. And I wish her all the best with everything. But it was good to go see it. But what does this have to do with the missing materials? Well, this removal of the materials, my father's archival materials from existence that I can tell, I mean, I think it's out there, is exactly this pattern of severance. The missing materials represent the severance of my role as the daughter to my father. And this is unacceptable. So where are those missing materials? Who has them? Where are they now? And that's a question that I continue to ask, and I will continue to ask it until I have an answer. Okay. More later.